My name is Manga Young, and at 34, I never thought I would be sitting in a high-rise law office in Century City, watching my own parents announce, with the biggest smiles on their faces, that the $26 million beachfront villa in Laguna Beach was going straight to my younger brother, Tucker. They did not even try to hide it. My dad leaned back in his chair and said loudly enough for the entire room to hear, "The beachfront villa will belong to your younger brother." Mom nodded, patting Tucker's arm as if he had just won the lottery. I felt the air leave my lungs. That villa was not just property. It was every summer of my childhood, every promise my grandmother ever made to me. And now they were handing it over as if it meant nothing. Tucker smirked. My parents looked like they had already won. Then the family lawyer, Mr. Stanley Fletcher, cleared his throat, looked my father directly in the eye, and said, "Mrs. Elaine Lawrence's will cannot be changed." The color drained from my parents' faces so fast I thought they might pass out. If you are watching this, drop a comment and tell me where you are from. Hit the like button and subscribe right now, because you need to hear how my grandmother outsmarted every single one of them from beyond the grave. I grew up in a big house in Naperville, Illinois, less than an hour west of Chicago. The neighborhood was quiet and tree-lined, the kind of place where kids rode bikes until the streetlights came on and everybody knew everybody. My parents, William and Patricia Young, both worked long hours in banking downtown, so most days after school it was just me and whatever sitter they had hired that month. The person who actually raised me was my grandmother, Elaine Lawrence. She lived most of the year in California, but every summer, the second school let out, I flew out alone to stay with her. No parents, no little brother yet, just Grandma and me in the sprawling beachfront villa in Laguna Beach. That house was magic, floor-to-ceiling windows looking straight out at the Pacific, salt air that never left your skin, and the sound of waves crashing all night long. We would wake up early, make blueberry pancakes from scratch, then spend hours walking the shoreline collecting sea glass. In the afternoons, she taught me how to read a balance sheet on the patio while the sun burned the fog off the water. At night, we sat on the balcony, her arm around me, watching the lights along the coast sparkle like scattered diamonds. More than once, she pulled me close, pointed at the house and the horizon, and said the exact same words every time. "This house will always be yours, Dakota. I am building everything for you." I believed her with every part of me. She was not just saying it, she showed it. She opened a college fund in my name when I was 8, put me on the deed of a small trust when I was 12, and took me to board meetings in Los Angeles before I could drive. She told anyone who would listen that I was the future of everything she had worked for. Grandma had started with nothing, widowed young with one tiny beach motel in the 70s that she flipped and rolled into 28 luxury properties up and down the coast. She never remarried, never slowed down, and she made sure I knew every step of the journey. Those summers were not vacations, they were training. Back in Illinois the rest of the year, Mom and Dad were proud in their own way, but distant. Weekends were golf tournaments and client dinners. Birthdays were nice, but Grandma's handwritten cards with $1,000 savings bonds always felt bigger. She was the one who flew in for my school plays, the one who sat with me when I cried over my first breakup, the one who told me I was capable of running the world if I wanted to. Looking back, those years in Laguna Beach were the only time I truly felt like I belonged somewhere. The villa was not just a house, it was proof that somebody had chosen me completely. No questions, no competition. Grandma Elaine promised me the future, and I hung every dream I had on that promise. Everything started cracking right after I left for college. I was 19, studying business at UCLA so I could stay close to Laguna Beach, and Grandma Elaine's empire exploded almost overnight. A forgotten piece of coastal land she had inherited decades earlier suddenly became prime development territory. She sold it for an unbelievable profit and poured every dollar into luxury resorts. Within 8 years, she owned 28 properties from San Diego to Big Sur, each one booked solid year-round. Forbes ran a cover story calling her the most successful self-made woman in California hospitality. Her net worth shot past $400 million. That was when my parents changed. Dad quit his regional manager job at the bank without warning. Mom put the Naperville house on the market that same week. They told me during a quick video call that they were moving the whole family to Orange County to help Grandma manage everything in her older years. Tucker, my younger brother, who was only 11 at the time, was thrilled about living near the beach. I remember feeling uneasy, but I brushed it off. After all, they were her only daughter and son-in-law. It made sense that they would want to be closer. The shift was subtle at first. Visits to the villa that used to be just Grandma and me suddenly included Mom dropping by to check on things. Dad started accompanying Grandma to meetings, carrying her briefcase, speaking for her when reporters asked questions. Within a year, they had convinced her to let them move into the guest house on the Laguna property so they could be there if she needed anything in the middle of the night. The staff Grandma had trusted for decades began disappearing, replaced by people Mom personally hired. The chef who had cooked for us every summer was gone. The gardener who knew every plant by name retired unexpectedly. Phone calls grew shorter. When I tried to reach Grandma directly, Mom would answer and say she was resting or in a meeting or out with friends. My weekend trips down the coast somehow always coincided with last-minute family obligations that did not include me. Texts went unanswered for days, then weeks. The handwritten letters I mailed every month started coming back, returned to sender. Someone had quietly changed the mailing address on file. I confronted Dad once during a rare dinner in Newport Beach. I asked why I was being kept at arm's length. He laughed it off and told me I was being dramatic. He said Grandma simply preferred having her daughter nearby now that she was getting older. Mom added that I was busy with classes and should not worry so much. Tucker, already picking up their tone, smirked and said, maybe I should focus on my own life instead of trying to control everything. The worst part was watching Grandma's own words change in front of my parents. She started saying things like, Tucker is such a good boy, always checking on me, or your mother knows best how to handle the properties. I knew those were not her real thoughts. I had seen the way her eyes searched for me across crowded rooms, the way her hands squeezed mine a little too hard when nobody was looking. But the wall kept growing higher, and I was on the wrong side of it. By the time I graduated, visits were down to major holidays. Even then, I stayed in a hotel because the guest house was being renovated. The woman who once flew across the country for my high school graduation now had her calendar completely managed by Mom. My direct phone line to her villa rang once and then went straight to voicemail forever. The only connection left was the occasional letter I sent to her lawyer's office, hoping someone would slip it into her hands. That was the new normal. My parents in full control, Tucker treated like the golden child, and me slowly, deliberately pushed out of the picture. 4 years ago, I got a call from Grandma Ela's private line, the one only 3 people in the world had. She never used it unless something was serious. When I picked up, she did not bother with small talk. She told me to drive to her secondary office in Palm Springs the next morning and to tell no one, not even my roommate. I arrived at 9 sharp. The building was small and unmarked, the kind of place nobody would notice. Grandma was already there, waiting in a conference room with the blinds drawn. She looked thinner than the last time I had seen her, and there were dark circles under her eyes, but her voice was steady. She locked the door behind me and slid a thick folder across the table. For the past decade, she had kept everything in a revocable living trust, so she could change it whenever she wanted. To make life easier, she had named Dad co-trustee years earlier, giving him full access to accounts and signature authority in case anything happened to her. It was supposed to be a safety net. It had become a pipeline. Grandma had hired an outside forensic accountant after noticing money moving faster than the business justified. The report showed that over the previous 3 years, my parents had quietly transferred $47 million into accounts they controlled, always in amounts small enough to avoid automatic flags, always labeled as consulting fees, property maintenance, or family support. Everything was technically legal because the trust was still revocable and Dad had signing power. She looked me straight in the eye and said the words, "I'll never forget that I trusted your father too much once. Never again." That same week, she contacted Stanley Fletcher, the attorney who had handled her contracts since the 80s. They met in complete secret. Stanley drafted an irrevocable trust that could not be changed or revoked by anyone, ever. On a single day, while my parents thought she was at a spa appointment, Grandma signed papers transferring 62% of the voting shares in the resort company, the Laguna Beach villa free and clear, and $80 million in liquid assets into the new trust. I was named sole beneficiary and sole trustee. The moment the documents were notarized, those assets legally left her estate forever. Dad's co-trustee power no longer reached them. She pushed the final page toward me, her hand shaking only slightly. "This is yours now, Dakota. They will never see it coming. Promise me you will protect what I built for you." I promised. She made me swear on everything we had together that I would never breathe a word, not even hint, until the day her regular will was read. She knew my parents would fight, scream, maybe even try to contest anything they could see. But an irrevocable trust created while she was clearly competent was ironclad under California law. They could rage all they wanted. They would never touch it. We sat in silence for a long time after that. She told me she had already started limiting Dad's access to the remaining accounts and planned to update the revocable trust again to leave them only a modest lifetime income, enough to live comfortably but nothing they could raid. The real legacy, the controlling interest in the house that meant everything to both of us, was already safe. When I left that afternoon, she hugged me harder than she had in years and whispered, "Play along. Let them think they've won." Then she walked me to my car herself, something she had not done since I was a child. I drove back to Los Angeles carrying the weight of the biggest secret I would ever keep. For the next 4 years, I acted like nothing had changed. I smiled through awkward holiday dinners, let Mom intercept my calls, watched Tucker show off new cars he had not earned. Every time doubt crept in, I remembered Grandma's face in that locked room and the steel in her voice when she said, "Never again." She was still in control. She had simply moved the chess pieces while nobody was looking. 3 weeks ago, Grandma Elaine passed away at 83 in her sleep, right there in the Laguna Beach villa. The news hit me like a wave pulling me under. I flew back to California immediately, but the funeral was already being planned by my parents without a single call to ask what I thought. They turned it into a spectacle, the kind of event that made headlines in the Orange County Register. A celebrity officiant, a string quartet playing Vivaldi, white orchids flown in from Hawaii covering every surface of the massive hall at the resort's main property in Dana Point. 200 guests, including business partners and local politicians, all dressed in designer black under crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people's homes. The service felt more like a performance than a goodbye. Mom stood at the podium in a tailored suit, her voice cracking just enough to draw sympathetic murmurs from the crowd as she spoke about Grandma's unwavering devotion to family. Dad flanked her, nodding solemnly, his hand on her shoulder as if they were the perfect picture of grief. Tucker sat in the front row with them, head bowed, looking every bit the devoted grandson. I arrived late because my flight from Chicago was delayed by storms, and when I slipped into the back, they had saved me a seat in the third row behind a cluster of distant cousins I barely recognized. No usher guided me forward, no one moved to make space. During the eulogy, Mom glanced my way once, her eyes lingering just long enough to make sure I noticed where I was sitting. Then she turned back to the microphone and spoke about how Grandma had sacrificed so much for her children and grandchildren, always putting family first, even when it meant making tough choices. The words twisted in my gut. I wanted to stand up and shout that the woman they were describing had been the one constant in my life, not a prop for their narrative. Afterward, at the reception in the resort's grand ballroom, my parents worked the room like hosts at a gala. Dad shook hands with executives from competing hotel chains, talking about continuing Grandma's legacy while sipping scotch from a crystal tumbler. Mom circulated with trays of past hors d'oeuvres, pulling aunts and uncles into corners to whisper. I caught snippets as I tried to pay my respects to old family friends. Dakota's been so busy with her own career, Mom said to Aunt Lydia, my father's sister, loud enough for me to hear across the table. She hasn't been around much these last few years. You know how it is with young people. Aunt Lydia nodded politely, then shot me an apologetic look when Mom walked away. Later, Uncle Ray, Dad's brother from back in Illinois, pulled me aside near the dessert station and asked why I looked so drained. I told him about the seat in the third row. He sighed and said he had noticed the same thing happening to him during the planning calls, suggestions from Mom that he might not want to fly out if it was too much trouble. It was not just me. The funeral had been choreographed to highlight who they considered the inner circle. Tucker spent the entire time on his phone, snapping selfies with the floral arrangements and posting stories about honoring Grandma's memory. When I approached him to say how sorry I was, he barely looked up, muttered something about needing to get back to a meeting, and walked off toward a group of his college buddies who had shown up uninvited. The only bright spot was a quiet moment with Lucia Navarro, Grandma's personal assistant of 32 years. She found me by the balcony doors, slipped a small envelope into my hand, and whispered that Grandma had left specific instructions for her to deliver it only if I came. Inside was a handwritten note from Stanley Fletcher on heavy cream stationery. Please come to the reading, it's critical. No explanation, just those 4 words and the date, time, and address of his office in Century City. Lucia squeezed my arm and said Grandma had made her promise to tell me she was proud, no matter what happened next. 10 days later, I walked into that Century City conference room, feeling like I was stepping into a trap. The space was all polished marble and leather, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Hollywood Hills under a hazy afternoon sky. Around the long oak table sat about a dozen people, a handful of resort executives in suits, 2 or 3 distant relatives from Grandma's side, Aunt Lydia looking uncomfortable in the corner, and of course my parents and Tucker at the head, as if they owned the place. Dad had his arm draped over Mom's chair. Tucker sprawled back with his feet almost on the table, scrolling through his phone. They did not even acknowledge me when I entered. I took the empty seat at the far end, nodding to Lucia, who had come as a witness. The air hummed with tension, the kind that builds before a storm. Mom kept glancing at her watch. Dad drummed his fingers on the armrest. Tucker cracked a joke about the traffic that made the executives chuckle nervously. I stayed silent, folding my hands in my lap, the note from Stanley burning a hole in my pocket. Whatever was coming, I knew it would not be good. 10 days after the funeral, we sat around the long oak table in Century City. The room smelled of fresh coffee and expensive leather. Sunlight poured through the windows and bounced off the polished surface, making the tension feel even sharper. My parents had arrived early and claimed the 2 chairs closest to Stanley. Dad wore the same navy suit he used for board meetings. Mom wore a black dress that probably cost more than most people's rent. Tucker slouched beside them in sunglasses, refusing to take them off indoors, legs stretched out like he already owned the place. Stanley entered at exactly 2 o'clock, carrying only a slim leather folder. He greeted everyone politely, took his seat at the head of the table, and began with the standard formalities. Small charitable bequests, a few modest gifts to longtime employees, 50,000 here, 100,000 there. Every time my name was not mentioned, Mom's smile grew a little wider. Tucker kept checking his watch. An hour in, the room was getting restless. Dad cleared his throat and leaned forward, clearly done waiting. He glanced at Mom, got the nod, and spoke loudly enough for every microphone in the building to pick up. The beachfront villa and most assets will go to Tucker. Dakota has her own path. Mom placed a perfectly manicured hand on Tucker's shoulder and added, "We're sure Elaine wanted the family legacy protected by someone who's been here every day." Tucker finally removed his sunglasses, smirked straight at me, and said, "Yeah, you didn't even visit much." A few executives shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Lydia looked down at her lap. I felt every pair of eyes land on me. waiting for tears or anger or anything. I gave them nothing. I just sat there, hands folded, heart hammering against my ribs. Stanley did not react at first. He finished organizing a small stack of papers, then adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Dad. A tiny smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. He cleared his throat once, the sound cutting through the room like a blade, and spoke in the calm, measured voice he had used for 40 years. "Mrs. Elaine Lawrence's will cannot be changed, sir." Dead silence. Dad's face went from smug to confused in half a second. Mom's hand froze on Tucker's shoulder. Tucker actually sat up straight. Stanley opened the leather folder and slid a thick document across the table toward me. 4 years ago, while Mrs. Lawrence was in full possession of her faculties, she executed an irrevocable trust. 62% of the voting shares in Lawrence Luxury Resorts, the Laguna Beach residence free and clear, and $80 million in liquid assets were transferred into this trust on that date. Dakota Young is the sole beneficiary and sole trustee. Those assets are no longer part of the probate estate and are not governed by the will we are reading today. You could have heard a pin drop. Dad's mouth opened and closed. Mom turned the color of paper. Tucker slammed his palm on the table hard enough to rattle the water glasses. "This is bullshit," he shouted, standing halfway out of his chair. "There's no way Grandma did that." Stanley did not flinch. He simply turned another page and continued as if reading the weather. "The trust is ironclad under California law. It cannot be contested, amended, or revoked. Mrs. Lawrence also left instructions that any challenge to either the trust or the will would trigger a full forensic audit of all accounts during the final 5 years of her life." Mom finally found her voice, though it came out shaky. "This can't be legal." Dad's fist came down next, making the executives jump. "She was sick. She didn't know what she was signing." Stanley looked at him over the rim of his glasses. "Mrs. Lawrence underwent a full capacity evaluation by 2 independent physicians the week before signing. Both reports are attached. She was sharp as ever." Tucker kicked his chair back and started pacing. Where her actual family was concerned, Dakota barely showed up. I still had not said a word. I did not need to. The document in front of me carried Grandma's signature in her familiar bold ink, properly witnessed, notarized, and dated. Next to it was a single handwritten line in her handwriting that made my throat tighten. "For my Dakota, the only one I ever trusted completely. Love always, G." Dad lunged across the table, trying to grab the papers. Stanley calmly pulled them back. Security appeared in the doorway without anyone calling them. Aunt Lydia covered her mouth with both hands. One of the older executives actually started clapping slowly before catching himself and stopping. Mom was crying now, but they were not sad tears. They were furious, ugly tears. She pointed at me with a trembling finger. "You knew? You planned this?" I met her eyes for the first time that day and spoke for the first time in the entire meeting. "No, Mom, Grandma did." The room erupted. Phones started buzzing. Tucker stormed out, slamming the door so hard the glass rattled. Dad shouted for his own lawyer on speakerphone right there in the conference room. Mom collapsed back into her chair, whispering "impossible" over and over. Stanley waited for the noise to die down, then quietly closed the folder. "Meeting adjourned. Miss Young, please stay. We have some signatures to take care of." As the others filed out in stunned silence, I finally let out the breath I had been holding for 4 long years. 8 months after that day, everything had flipped upside down. The court-ordered forensic audit under California probate code began 2 weeks after the reading and lasted almost 5 months. Independent accountants went through every transaction Grandma had made since her 80th birthday. The final report was brutal. My parents had moved $47 million in total, always just under the threshold that would have required Grandma's personal signature. They paid themselves management fees, bought investment properties in Tucker's name, and funneled cash into offshore accounts labeled as future family trusts. All of it was technically allowed while Dad still had co-trustee power on the old revocable trust. But the moment the irrevocable trust stripped that power, the transfers became financial elder abuse under California law. The civil lawsuit hit them 6 weeks later. They lost by summary judgment. The judge ordered full restitution, plus penalties and legal fees. The Naperville house, the one I grew up in, went on the market the same week and sold in 9 days to a tech couple from San Francisco who paid cash. Mom and Dad moved into a 2-bedroom rental in Irvine, the kind with beige carpets and no ocean view. Tucker's fall was faster and louder. He had been betting heavily on sports books the entire time he thought he was about to inherit hundreds of millions of dollars. When the money never came, he could not cover the markers. Creditors filed liens within 30 days. His leased Porsche was towed from the driveway of his Newport Beach condo while he was still asleep. 2 months later, the bank foreclosed on the condo itself. He's living in a studio in Costa Mesa now, driving for rideshare apps to make minimum payments. I used my new majority shareholder vote the day the trust assets officially transferred. A special board meeting was called at 8 in the morning. By 8:15, every director my parents had installed over the last 6 years was gone. I did not raise my voice. I simply read the voting results and thanked them for their service. Security escorted them out before lunch. Lucia and a handful of Grandma's original team stepped into the vacant roles that same afternoon. The company did not miss a single reservation. The personal fallout was quieter but final. I changed my phone number the week the audit report dropped. New email, new social accounts, everything private. I blocked Mom, Dad, and Tucker everywhere the day the judge signed the restitution order. No angry voicemails, no tearful apology, no bargaining text ever reached me, because there was no longer any way for them to send one. I hired a service to return any physical mail unopened. Aunt Lydia tried to play middleman once and received a polite but firm letter from my attorney explaining that all future contact would be considered harassment. I kept the Laguna Beach villa exactly as Grandma left it. The staff, who had been fired years earlier, came back within weeks, some of them crying when they walked through the door again. We reopened the guest cottage to actual guests for the first time in a decade and turned it into a small writer's retreat in Grandma's name. Revenue for the first quarter was the highest in company history. I never heard from my parents again. Not a birthday card, not a Christmas text, nothing. Tucker's old friends told Lucia that he blames me for everything and says I stole his future. I do not lose sleep over it. Sometimes, late at night, I walk the same beach path Grandma and I used to take, and I still expect to see her waiting at the tide line with 2 cups of coffee. She is not there, but the house is mine. The company is safe, and the people who tried to erase me from both are gone from my life forever. That is the price they paid. 1 year to the day after the will reading, I stood on the balcony of the Laguna Beach villa, sea wind whipping through my hair. The sun was dropping into the Pacific, painting the sky the same orange-pink Grandma always called her favorite color. I had come alone, carrying only a small brass key Lucia handed me the week before with a quiet smile. She told me Grandma left instructions that the key would make sense when the time was right. The key opened a wall safe hidden behind a painting in the master bedroom. Inside was a single cream envelope with my name written in Grandma's unmistakable handwriting. I carried it back to the balcony, sat in the same wicker chair we used to share, and opened it. My dearest Dakota, if you're reading this, then everything went exactly as I planned. I knew the moment I discovered what your parents were doing that I had to protect you the only way I still could. The irrevocable trust was my final move on the board. I played weak when I was strongest, and I won. I never doubted your heart for a second. You were the only one who loved me for me, not for what I could give. That is why everything that truly matters is now yours. Live well, build something beautiful, and remember, real love doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just quietly moves the pieces until the game is over. All my love forever, Grandma Elaine. I folded the letter, pressed it to my chest, and let the tears come. Not the angry tears from the reading, not the grieving tears from the funeral, just quiet, grateful ones. 3 months after that day, the board voted unanimously to rename the company Lawrence Luxury Resorts. The new signage went up on every property within weeks. Revenue is higher than ever. Employee satisfaction scores are through the roof, and the foundation I started in Grandma's name has already funded full college scholarships for 50 kids who grew up in situations like the one I escaped. I have not heard a single word from Dad, Mom, or Tucker in 12 full months. No letters, no emails, no surprise visits. Their names do not appear on my phone, my inbox, or my doorstep. They have simply ceased to exist in my world, and I sleep better than I ever have. Greed can tear a family apart faster than anything else. But real love, the quiet, fierce kind Grandma showed me, always finds a way to win in the end, even from the grave. Thank you for staying with me until the very last word. If this story hit you the way it still hits me some nights, drop a comment and tell me what you would have done in my place. Have you ever had to walk away from family to protect yourself? I read every single one. Thank you for listening. Take care of the people who truly see you, and never let anyone make you feel small for choosing peace over poison.